There's a book that has been banned by the Catholic Church, burnt by governments, and turned into a slur against anyone who actually tries to read it. The people who banned it called it immoral. The people who burnt it called it absolutely dangerous. And for about 500 years, it has never gone out of print. The book is actually called The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. The people calling it dangerous, they were absolutely right, but not for the reasons that they actually gave. Let's start with this. Ask most people what Machiavellian actually means, and they'll say a few things upright, manipulative, cunning, ruthless. They're not wrong about these words, they're actually wrong about what they are actually describing. See, for about 5 centuries, we have treated Machiavelli like he invented something. Like before him, power was clean and honest and fair, and then he showed up all of a sudden and corrupted the whole thing. That's not what he actually did. What he actually did was something far more worse. He watched how power actually worked, not how it is supposed to work, not how the church said that it actually worked, not how the philosophers argued it should work, and then simply wrote it down plainly without an apology. He described the prince who keeps his promise, losing his throne to the one who actually knows when to break them. He described loyalty as a resource that evaporates the moment it becomes an inconvenience. He described the leader who is loved but not feared, getting deposed by the one who is feared but who is not fully loved. None of this is actually new behavior. None of this. He just said things that already existed, but the difference here being he just said it out loud. And that specific reasons, not the ideas themselves, is what actually got the book banned. The church didn't ban it because it was merely just false. Picture this, and I think what I'm going to say in the next 10 to 15 seconds is actually more relatable to people than they actually think. You've been in a room where somebody less qualified than you got the thing that you actually deserved. And every time that this actually happened, you told yourself that the system itself was broken. What if I tell you that the system was exactly working as it was designed and you just hadn't read the manual completely? Picture a Thursday afternoon. Marcus has been debugging a production issue since 6 in the morning. He fixes it by noon. Nobody sees this. 2 floors up, simultaneously, Derek is actually having a lunch with the vice president. Not about anything specific, just lunch, the way they do every single week. 6 weeks later, the promotion goes to Derek. Marcus tells himself that the system is broken. He's right. He is also unfortunately still there. Machiavelli watched the same dynamic play out in Florence in 1498. Not with engineers and vice presidents, but with secretaries and senators, with generals and dukes, but the structure was identical. Talented men destroyed not because they failed at their jobs, but because they failed to read the second system that was running and underneath the first very system. Every institution you've been a part of has two structures. The first one is on paper, right? Which is titles, reporting lines, official authority. The one which is actually present and spoken a lot about in onboarding and onboarding documents. The second one is invisible. It's made of access, obligation, reputation, and most importantly, the knowledge of what people actually want versus what they say they want. The first structure is what you're evaluated on. The second is what actually determines what happens to you. Machiavelli didn't just invent this, he mapped this. And then here is the part that made the church very uncomfortable and nervous. He explained it clearly enough that anybody could absolutely read it. Machiavelli looked at the assumption that most of us run on, that people want to do good work, that merit rises, that loyalty is rewarded, and he said, you are going to get hurt. Not because people are evil, because people are something more complicated than evil. They are loyal until loyalty becomes expensive. They want to be seen as fair and far by fair more than they actually want to be fair in real life. They want to believe that the person who rose to the top deserved to rise. because the alternate implication about what it actually meant and what it actually would do if they wouldn't have risen is actually too heavy to hold and much far from reality for any single fucking person to actually accept. The CEO who cuts 200 jobs the week before Christmas and actually takes a retention bonus the same month isn't actually a monster. He's a person whose incentives pointed one way and whose self image pointed the other, and his incentives won. They almost always do. This is the fundamental point. Machiavelli's gift, and this is the uncomfortable one, was the one he didn't moralize about, right? He just said, if you want to understand what someone will do, don't listen to what they actually value. Watch what they are rewarded for. Folks, you already know this. The colleague you stopped confiding in, not because of one thing, but because you noticed slowly, then all at once, that your information kept arriving in wrong places. You adjusted, you stopped sharing, you told yourself that you were just learning who to trust. The recalibration, that quiet private adjustment based on observation behavior rather than cited intention, that is the book, compressed into a single moment of human experience. And we as humans face thousands of such situations every single day. And everybody's actually been there, and you've done this. And someone at some point did it to you first. The church banned the prince in 1559. 46 years later, Machiavelli actually wrote it. The official reason that was stated was immorality, a manual for tyrants. Here is what was actually happening. In 1559, the church controlled territory across Europe. It commanded armies, it made unmade kings, and it was the precise technical sense that Machiavelli used the word, right? A prince. He hadn't written about the church specifically, and he didn't really need to. Anyone who actually picked up the book, read the book, and looked at the Rome would see the reflection almost immediately. The prince wasn't banned because it described how tyrants actually behave. It was banned because it described how everyone with power behaves, including the people with enough power to do the banning. The book is a mirror. The church didn't ban an argument, it banned a complete reflection. Think about the last time someone called an idea too clinical or too political. Ask whether they were protecting you from a bad idea or were they protecting themselves from being seen. One question, no answer specifically required. In 1512, the Medici returned to Florence. The government Machiavelli had served for 14 years was actually dissolved overnight. He was arrested, tortured, released, and then for the rest of his life excluded. He never was able to work in the government again. He spent his final years on a small farm outside Florence, writing letters to the most powerful men who didn't respond, trying to get his ideas in front of people who couldn't see them. The Prince was written for Lorenzo de Medici, an attempt to actually get him back into the room. Lorenzo de Medici never actually went on to read it. The greatest analyst of power in Western history, a man who understood it more precisely than almost anyone before or since, spent his last 15 years on the outside of it, watching, writing, mapping everything, and able to do absolutely nothing. He knew exactly what was happening to him. He could see the incentive. He understood the game very, very well, but he still lost. Because understanding power and having power are not the same thing. You have actually also been through the situation. You've seen something in your organization that nobody is willing to name. You understand a dynamic in your team that gets talked about but never being completely addressed. You watch something fail repeatedly and you exactly know why. And you've stayed quiet because the cost felt too high, or the timing could actually feel wrong, or the next quarter seemed soon enough. Machiavelli also saw everything. He wrote all of it down. He sent it to someone who didn't open it. The question he leaves you with isn't about power, let me get this straight. It's about the distance between what you understand and what you actually do with it, and how long you're actually willing to let that particular distance grow. Most people, when they talk and when they finally understand a particular game, spend the rest of their lives explaining why they chose not to play. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the biggest lesson that you can actually pick